Hi, my name is Nagra. I'm a DEI and human rights specialist and also subject matter expert for the Journeys Through Prejudice project. This is part two of a two-part series that we're exploring themes of the project. The first part explored the project itself and how we facilitate discussions on diversity, equity, inclusion, and human rights. And in this episode, we're really going to focus on moving forward and what does it take and what are individual and community responses and expectations of moving forward to address issues of racism and discrimination. Really looking at what we call the underlying factors and issues that can help us move forward to reduce the incidence of racism and discrimination. It's going to be broken up into three primary areas. The first one, we're going to be talking about agency and social capital and institutions. The second one, we're going to be talking about education and the education sector and the important role that education can play in moving forward. And the last theme that we're going to be exploring is allyship. We're going to be looking at what does it mean to have intercultural connections and communications and working together, as well as across various demographic groups and identities, and looking at what does allyship mean and how can we work together as a collective. So I want to start off with the first aspect of what's most important. And we talk about this through two different lenses. When we're talking about agency, social capital, and building institutions, we're really looking at a community-based approach to addressing racism and discrimination. First and foremost, it's really important for individuals to have a strong sense of their identity and social location, to have what I call a more accurate and inclusive representation of who and what they are as part of Canadian history. Quite often, history is engaged and shown through a Eurocentric lens. And so building agency and social capital is really important. Communities must build their own institutions. We can't just simply rely on what we call the wider institutions and communities to be able to fulfill the nuanced ideas and expressions and understanding. Yes, major institutions can have some sense of what we call cultural competency, but realistically, communities must build their own infrastructure. They should have, world-class film festivals, arts and culture centers. All those institutions that help sustain and grow a community is critically important. And so that's a really important piece to build some layers of agency. In addition, there must be and needs to be representation in mainstream as we sometimes define it. And it doesn't mean that for someone like me or my community or my identity makes it in mainstream is the only way that we can make it. But it has to be an intersectionality of both community-based institutions, being able to express who and what we are through our own lenses and words, and be part of what we call the normal social fabric of mainstream institutions and media. I think right now, there's still a lack of representation and identity of who we are as Canadians. And I can just look at my own identity as a Sikh Canadian and as a racialized person, sometimes referred to as Punjabi or South Asian, and ask ourselves, how many times have you seen a major movie, blockbuster film, or even a series on Netflix or other streaming services? Or looked at shows that are produced by our own institutions here in Canada, for example, CBC or other institutions that are creating films and documentaries and shows, and ask yourself that why can't an individual who looks like me and my character be represented in as any character possible? We are parents, we are neighbors, we are professionals, we participate in every single sector of employment in Canada, and so we should be playing every single role possible. But yet that's not necessarily the case in 2024. And so creating these concepts of agency and social capital will change and shift the default narrative of what it means or who it means to be Canadian, and be able to provide individuals who look like me and our community and our history in a more inclusive and accurate way, such that when we are walking the streets of Canada, we are seeing more than just the color of our skin. We are seen as people who had a huge participation and fought with valor and great courage in Worlds War I and II, alongside even in Canada in one of its greatest moments around Vimy Ridge itself. We were also individuals who signed up to fight for Canada, although we're disenfranchised during World War I. And so these are important narratives and stories that can create agency of who and what we are as a people in Canada, as Canadians. And so it's really important to make sure that we empower both ourselves as a community to know our history so that we can walk around here to be able to have a greater sense of pride as Canadians, and then also have greater representation in what is sometimes defined as mainstream media. Those two aspects of social capital and agency are important, as well as building and funding and having appropriate funding for community-based institutions. Sometimes disproportionately, community-based institutions are not funded as equally as other mainstream institutions, yet those are not servicing the needs of many communities in Canada. The second theme that I want to explore is the theme of education. Education plays a critical role in Canada and around the world. But if I just look at ourselves here in Ontario, and in particular in the region of Peel or the GTA, where there's a large diversity of students and people living together, it's really important that education plays a critical role in defining who and what we are as Canadians. The literature that students are exposed to and engage should be a reflection of their identities and their lived experiences, and how those lived experiences help shape and build Canada as part of nation building. So curriculum is an important piece, representation as well in the education sector. What does the representation of school board employees, from teachers to support staff to EAs to administration, should also reflect the student body and student population. It's important to make sure that the education system recognizes a critical role that it plays in terms of defining some of those aspects we talked about earlier around identity, around social capital, around agency. And who we are and what we are is shaped by the stories we hear, the stories we're told, the books we read, and the narratives that we're exposed to. And so it's really important that our education system has a curriculum that is more representative of who we are as Canadians, who we want to be as Canadians, and be able to challenge some of the inequities that exist within Canada, and have critical conversations about racism, discrimination, and marginalization, and diversity and equity. And so education has and will continue to play a key role, and it's important for us to be able to recognize, even as parents and as community members too, to have some of the tools necessary to be able to help support the education system, work in partnership, and community-based organizations as well, to work in partnership with the educational sector, as well as parents, because parents play a key role in children's education, and be a good partner with the school and the classroom and the curriculum, and as part of parent councils as well, to be active participants. And I think that way we can continue to grow. The textbook should be more reflective. The lesson plan should be more reflective. The course offerings should be more reflective and inclusive of who we are as Canadians. And so just recognizing the important role that education plays for us to move forward to minimize and disrupt discrimination, racism, and prejudice. And finally, the last piece of allyship. What does it mean to be an ally? What does it mean to be an advocate? These concepts are really important. We can't work just as individuals or just as singular communities. When we define ourselves as Canadians, it's a manifestation of all of us as a collective, featuring many different individuals and communities that represent the beautiful diversity we are as Canadians. And so allyship is important. We must work across communities, with communities, multicultural communities. We must intersect across various cultural communities to work together so that we can all be on the same page in terms of wanting to address racism, discrimination, prejudice, and hate. In addition, as individuals too, we want to make sure that we're working across various aspects of identity, because when we experience racism and discrimination, sometimes we don't just face it based on one aspect of our identity. Sometimes there may be intersectionalities that can further marginalize an individual. If somebody is racialized and they are also part of the 2S LGBTQ community, that intersection can make it much more difficult for people in terms of how they experience the world around them and the discrimination and marginalization that they face. So it's important as allies that we must look at our places of power and privilege as well, and look for those spaces where we can walk side by side, walk in front, advocate on behalf of, or stand behind individuals in a form of allyship, and understand what does allyship really mean and what are the implications for us when we're speaking with or for individuals and communities and situations as well. So allyship is an important concept. It's something important as we move forward. In fact, all these three things combined, when we're looking at agency, social capital, and institutions within communities, when we're looking at the educational sector, and we're looking at becoming allies, all three things can play an important role in helping us minimize the impact and minimizing the incidence of racism and discrimination in Canada. Thank you very much.